Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you...
Hello and welcome back to Self-Inflicted RL Nostalgia. Every new GBV LP every, 3 months or so. My name is Jeff Gomez, and it feels pretty good to be saying that today we'll be looking at GBV's latest album, the brand spanking new double LP Zeppelin over China. It feels even better to say that this record is an absolute stunner. But first, let me also say that all music heard in this podcast is played and owned by Guided by Voices. And I should note, and probably should have noted before, that this podcast is not in any way associated with the band. I'm just a fan, and this podcast is written and produced solely by me. Go to the podcast website, everygbvlp.com, to listen to episodes covering all 26 GBV albums, as well as the 5 bonus episodes, not to mention a 27-track Guided by Voices tribute record featuring all original songs about or inspired by the band. It's called How Do You Spell GBV, and it's a lot of fun, so check it out. You can drop me a line with corrections, suggestions, or thoughts at jeff@everygbvlp.com. You can also check out my own website, don'tcallhome.com, for information on records I've made and books I wrote, some of which you can read or download for free. Once again, that's don'tcallhome.com. Now let's get to the show.
Good morning, sir. The crushed red packer was way up late in the
Hello, and yes, we are back. To be honest, I didn't think it'd be so soon. The podcast ended in late December after finishing up with LP number 25, Space Gun, and yet here it is just a few weeks later, and I'm taking an in-depth look at yet another GBV LP. However, I have to say that nothing pleases me more, since Zeppelin over China is a stone-cold classic. Now, the first thing to talk about as we get into the new record is the band. I'm super pleased to report that the lineup of Doug Gillard, Kevin March, Mark Shue, and Bobby Bare Jr. is holding firm from the last LP, as is the addition of fifth Beatle Travis Harrison, who's back not only to engineer the record, but who this time around gets a full-on producer credit. I'll talk more about that later. As a recap for any new listeners, Gillard joined the band for the 1997 LP Mag Earwig, when the lineup was basically Cleveland band Cobra Verde backing Bob. And while that situation only lasted for one tour and half of an LP, Doug stuck with Bob until the first big breakup of the band in 2004, after the last Matador record, Half Smiles of the Decomposed. In the decade following the demise of GBV, Gillard continued to collaborate with Pollard, first with a band called Lifeguards, and then with ESP Ohio in 2016. Drummer Kevin March entered the scene in 2003 for the Earthquake Glue record and tour, taking over from John McCann, who had only played on the previous album, Universal Truths in Cycles. March was later asked to fill in for Kevin Fennell during the final stage of the so-called classic lineup reunion. After Fennell was booted due to the infamous eBay drums incident, March played on the 2014 LP Cool Planet, as well as the subsequent tour. And yet, even though March only had the chance to play on a few GBV LPs, he proved an instant success, getting along well with Bob and sounding really great both on record and live. Opening up for the band on some of the Cool Planet dates was Nashville singer and songwriter Bobby Bare Jr. A longtime GBV fan, Bare kept in touch with Pollard and his wife after the tour. Then, in 2016, Pollard recorded the ESP Ohio project. This brought, as I mentioned before, Doug Gillard back into the fold. Travis Harrison, who'd worked with Bob and Doug on the 2011 Lifeguards record, Waving at the Astronauts, played drums and engineered the album. Playing bass on the ESP Ohio album was Mark Shue, a New York-based musician who was friendly with both Doug and Travis. He'd been in a band called The Library Is on Fire, along with a guy named Steve Five. One of the band's records, 2010's Magic Windows, Magic Nights, was produced by longtime Pollard and GBV collaborator Todd Tobias. Steve Five even went on to form a band with Tobias called Brother Earth, and he often appears in Circus Devil's videos as the creepy guy with a mask and teeth. So when Bob was looking to tour behind 2016's surprise return of GBV, Please Be Honest, a sort of odd album where he plays every instrument, he brought back Kevin March on drums and drafted in newcomers Bare Jr. and Shue. On guitar, initially he invited Nick Mitchell, no relation to original guitarist Mitch Mitchell. Nick Mitchell is a Dayton local who Bob had gotten close to. Together they'd made the solo LP Of Course You Are, not to mention they recorded 3 LPs together as Ricked Wiki, a project which featured both Pollard's and Mitchell's songs. Mitchell made it through about half of the Please Be Honest tour before things fell apart and he was booted from the band. Doug swooped in to save the day, and he's been back in GBV ever since. And to say that this new classic lineup is firing on all cylinders is an understatement. In fact, the 3 LPs this group of guys produced in 2017 and 2018, double album August by Cake and the single discs How Do You Spell Heaven and Space Gun, add up to a late period renaissance that I think is unprecedented in indie rock. Because even though last year saw the triumphant returns of a bunch of 90s bands with groups like The Breeders, Superchunk, and Low, all turning in really solid efforts, there's no comparison when looking at GBV's work in the past couple of years. These guys really are as good as they've ever been. The closest comparison I can make is David Bowie's Black Star, the late career highlight, which was as good as any of the albums he released in his 70s heyday. The biggest difference is that's one album, whereas Pollard's released 3 gems in a row and is still going strong. The latest example of Bob's winning streak is the band's most recent album, Zeppelin Over China. It is, to my ears, the band's most consistently enjoyable record pretty much ever. It's 32 songs over an hour and 15 minutes, and the whole thing just fucking rocks. Prior double album, August by Cake, followed the White Album template of being a crazy quilt of sounds, serving up idiosyncratic lo-fi songs like Fever Pitch and Jenna Rocks Grey, next to some of the most fully realized songs of the band's career. Adding to the eclectic nature of August was the fact that all 4 band members wrote and contributed their own songs. This gave it a stylistic diversity that had never really been heard before on a GBV record. And while, the band had always flirted with different styles and packed lots of influences into their albums, August by Cake was the fullest demonstration of GBV's mutable quality. Zeppelin Over China, while similar on the surface, is a totally different beast. This time around, it's all Pollard all the time. The LP features 32 tracks, and they're all written by Bob. No co-writes, nothing by other band members. By contrast, of August by Cake's 32 songs, Pollard only wrote or co-wrote 22 of them. So Zeppelin Over China represents the biggest chunk of new songs Bob's ever delivered in one GBV release. And when you factor in that pretty much the entire album is a high to mid-fi affair, very much in the tradition of recent albums Space Gun and How Do You Spell Heaven, this becomes even more impressive. Because if Pollard just followed the teenage guitar template and was bashing out these songs on his own in one take, then it'd be easy to see how he could deliver so many songs in one package. But the fact that Zeppelin both has so many songs and sounds so good is a real testament to how strong this new classic lineup is and how serious Bob is taking GBV these days. In terms of the album's name, it first appeared in a Circus Devils song. The album 5, released in 2005, has the track Thelonious Has Eaten All the Paper, which contains the following lines. A kingly post of teacups for the shining, a Zeppelin over China filled with flies, and helmet ships return from what I know, for bringing her seamen in disguise. However, the phrase itself is from even farther back. As Pollard explains, it was originally the title for a song that I wrote back in the late 70s called Zeppelin Over China, and Everybody Thinks It's a Rain Cloud. This is of course fascinating since part of that title was used for the 2004 track, Everybody Thinks I'm a Rain Cloud When I'm Not Looking. The original Zeppelin Over China track had been written for a short-lived and mostly imaginary band Pollard was in called Dash, Rip, Rock, and the Hairspray Boys. Bob's described the group as being a local new wave /punk /garage band, who later changed their name to Dash, Rip, Rock, and the Atomic Boys. They then became just the Atomic Boys until, finally, they were Rex, Rock, and the Clocks. All of that being said, the group never played live or recorded anything. They did, however, in true Pollard fashion, have a photo shoot. As a title for an LP, Zeppelin Over China is pretty good. It obviously makes you think of Led Zeppelin, but also has a whiff of the Guns N' Roses album Chinese Democracy, the one that took Axl Rose well over a decade to complete, which is, of course, the polar opposite of Pollard. And, of course, speaking of Guns N' Roses, they get name-checked on the Cash Rivers track MB on GNR. And whether Bob intended or not, the title has real significance in 2019, since Zeppelins are indeed flying over China these days. Believe it or not, huge solar-powered airships are being used as floating communication hubs, sort of like satellites within the Earth's atmosphere. They're 250 feet long, can stay in the air for half a year, and operate on practically no fuel. Rigid airships, as they're also called, were invented in the late 1800s by Germany's Count Ferdinand von Zeppelin. I should also note that a Zeppelin's different from a blimp. A blimp is just a big balloon, whereas a Zeppelin has a metal frame. And whereas, according to a prior GBV song, Blimps Go 90, the top speed of a Zeppelin is about 80 miles per hour. That being said, they usually have to go slower due to weather. Zeppelins even began in the 1930s to take passengers on transatlantic trips. It would take anywhere from 3 to 5 days depending on the winds. In fact, the Hindenburg, before it spectacularly blew up in New Jersey in 1937, killing 36 people, managed to make 17 transatlantic flights. And, believe it or not, Zeppelins are making a comeback. In Europe, airship manufacturers are taking tourists on Zeppelin rides, while other companies are, you guessed it, targeting the Chinese market. So Pollard was pretty prescient back in the day when he first wrote of Zeppelins over China. Another thing that I love about this record is the cover. While August by Cake was a kick-ass record, that was a so-so cover, whereas China has a really striking sleeve with some great Pollard artwork, a striking black background, and a really nice purple sans serif font. The collage featured on the cover is entitled Twice Providing Once, an apt name for artwork gracing the sleeve of a double album. The artwork is actually a collage sitting in the middle of a pool of blue fingernail polish that's been poured onto a mirror with a golden frame. Before gracing the cover of Zeppelin, it was featured on page 120 of Eat 14, and it now resides in a personal collection. I know this because it's mine. As soon as the cover was posted online, I went to the Robert Pollard art website and snatched it up. Pollard's wife sent it to me, along with a black background and a very nice letter. I'm now having it framed just like how it is on the cover of the LP. In fact, speaking of, if you have Zeppelin on vinyl, the artwork is exactly the same size as how it's pictured on the 12-inch sleeve. The only difference between the real thing and the photo is that, in real life, the gold of the frame is much more deep, and the blue fingernail polish has a lot of swirling detail that doesn't quite come out in the photograph. I'd always wanted to have a Pollard original, so to now have one that's featured on the cover of one of the band's best albums is even more special. The back cover is mainly white and features a picture of some white car seats. It's as if Pollard's saying, "Come on in, take a seat and get comfortable, because I'm about to take you on one hell of a ride." The inside of the gatefold sleeve holds just the lyrics in white type against a blue background. The CD version comes in a digipack with a booklet holding the lyrics, while the inside cover has once again the picture of the car seats. As I mentioned before, Travis Harrison is back not only to record and engineer the record, but for the first time in 4 LPs, he gets sole producer credit. The last GBV album to have a producer's credit was 2004's Half Smiles of the Decomposed, which was produced by longtime Pollard collaborator Todd Tobias. Travis Harrison's work with Pollard and the band over the last couple of years, and keep in mind he also now travels with the group as they tour, handling their live sound, has been truly exceptional, and I'm really glad he's been bumped up to full-blown producer. Pollard even recently hailed Travis as the 6th member of Guided by Voices, calling him the band's George Martin. Travis has completely changed the picture and method of making an album, adds Pollard. He makes it easier for me, as do the rest of the guys, and allows me to focus on pumping out songs. Once again, the band recorded at Travis Harrison's New York studio, Serious Business, as well as at Magic Door out in Montclair, New Jersey. Some of Sport Component National from last year's Space Gun was also recorded at the New Jersey studio. In fact, according to Bob, several of Zeppelin's tracks were intended for the prior LP, except he didn't think they fit in so well with the rest of the album, so they were held back until now. Montclair is also, it should be noted, where drummer Kevin March lives. Magic Door is owned and operated by Ray Ketchum, who's also a drummer for the band Elk City. Elk City at one time featured Sean Eden on guitar. He's in another favorite band of mine, Luna, who recently got back together and who put out a really nice record in 2017 called Sentimental Education. Vocals for Zeppelin Over China were once again recorded at Stillwater River Lodge, located just northeast of Pollard's hometown of Northridge. In my discussion with Travis Harrison, which you can listen to as a bonus episode, he told me how, when he first began recording Pollard's vocals, after the band had laid down the instrumental tracks, he brought a whole bunch of gear, but now he just checks into the Stillwater River Lodge with a laptop and a microphone, and Pollard then proceeds to sing all the songs in order over the span of just a couple of days. And even though Zeppelin's just now coming out, since the band toured behind Space Gun in the second half of 2018, a number of Zeppelin's songs were played throughout the tour, including The Rally Boys, Charmless Peters, My Future in Barcelona, and the album's first single, You Own the Night. That single came out way back in July and was originally going to be one of 7 singles issued from the record. One single was going to be released a month, leading up to Zeppelin's release. And while this would have meant an abundance of B-sides, and I'm sure a whole lot of cool artwork, sanity prevailed and Pollard shit-canned the ambitious idea, and so far, no other singles have been announced for the record. This explains the 6-month gap between the first and only single and the eventual LP. Also, unlike prior LP Space Gun, which sported 2 music videos, there has not yet been a video made for any of the Zeppelin Over China tracks. However, that's not so strange. GBV has recently made a habit of skipping records in terms of producing promotional clips. Space Gun had 2, How Do You Spell Heaven had none, but August by Cake had 1. 2016's surprise return of GBV, Please Be Honest, had a video slated, but it was never made. Listen to my bonus episode with Mike Postolakis to hear more about that. In terms of the overall sound of the record, it's absolutely stunning. Whereas in the past, ultra-anthemic tracks like The Rally Boys would have rocked, that's about all they would have done. Prior GBV albums either aimed to capture the band's ferocious live show, think of a record like Isolation Drills, or else they were all about capturing the experimental nature with which they were recorded, meaning Jimmy was dropping amps and Pollard was singing in his basement. Whereas here, a song like The Rally Boys has all the power of Game of Pricks and yet also adds subtle touches like string and synth washes. It sounds really great and it rocks, but it's also really polished. Another sign of Bob's maturity can be found in the language and vocabulary he's using. Just glancing at Zeppelin's tracks, you see words like carapace, bellicose, anathema, and vertiginous. If the Cash Rivers project is Pollard at his most lowbrow, a fair number of the tracks on Zeppelin are among the most sophisticated songs Bob's ever done. Mike Edwards hosted the outstanding podcast The Grand Hour, which has as its crazy goal to listen to every Pollard song in existence, has compared Bob's later work to that of a master painter like Andrew Wyeth. Whereas Pollard's earlier work, something like B1000, was crazy, frantic, and surreal, he's now controlled and working with a full grasp of his talent and what he wants to convey. It's a really great comparison, and I totally agree. Now, I should also mention that in the interim between the release of 2018's Space Gun, which came out way back in March in Zeppelin Over China, the band released 2 limited edition 6-song EPs as 7 inches. They both came out on the same day in early December of 2017, and each was limited at just 1,000 copies. One is called 100 Dougs, and the other is Wine Cork Stonehenge. There are 2 more 6-song EPs on the way, 1901 Acid Rock and Umlaut Over the Ozone, which should be coming out in March. And speaking of EAT number 14, page 39 features a collage entitled 1901 Acid Rock, though I'm not sure if that will grace the cover of the EP. The 7 inches are basically a way of teasing what's going to be compiled and resequenced into the next GBV record, which is called Warp and Woof. This means that, in addition to 2019 seeing the release of a 32-song double album, we're also going to get a 24-track LP in the form of Warp and Woof. Plus, don't forget that we've already heard the track Your Cricket is Rather Unique, an old Suitcase song resurrected by the band and sung by Kevin March, which is going to appear on the record after Warp and Woof. That had previously been billed as Street Party and then Rise of the Ants. However, Pollard has just changed the title yet again to Sweating the Plague. This means we're in store for at least 3 full-length Guided by Voices records just this year, with who knows how many others next year and beyond. And while I'd been critical in the past about Bob releasing too much stuff, pretty much all of Pollard's releases from the past couple of years have been real gems. The band really hasn't put out such consistently good records and at this pace since the early 90s. It's a great time to be a fan, and Zeppelin Over China is a great way to kick off the year. So let's now dive into this mammoth LP track by track. The album kicks off with Good Morning, Sir.
Good morning, sir. The crushed red packer was way up late in the funny house.
At 1 minute and 9 seconds, this is the second shortest song on the record. But unlike another opening track, Wire Greyhounds, the 35-second snippet that opened Universal Truths and Cycles, this track doesn't at all feel incomplete or too short. Instead, it's a pretty great way to open the album, especially since it starts with Pollard saying, well, good morning. If Bob's grand greeting of ladies and gentlemen at the start of August by Cake was, as author Nicholas Carr put it, a circus barker's come on, then in this opening, Uncle Bob's meeting us at his kitchen table fresh from a night's rest. And if everything that followed on Cake was indeed some sort of circus show, with each song being a different act in a night's entertainment, then Zeppelin Over China is instead Pollard at that kitchen table, cup of coffee in hand, playing for us his latest tunes. And this one's a keeper with some really funny lines, like when Bob changes the spice crushed red pepper to crushed red pecker. The song also references a Mr. Redbird. Pollard here is probably referencing cardinals, a red bird who can be seen year-round in Ohio. Bob also references a different kind of bird, starlings, on another song. Plus, a former jock, it could be a reference to the baseball team, the Cardinals, who are based out of nearby Missouri. But I also think that Mr. Redbird might be a pun on Red Burn, the title character from Herman Melville's fourth novel called simply Redburn. The book tells the story of Wellingborough Redburn's journey to Liverpool with a bunch of seedy sailors. It was based on a journey Melville himself had taken as a young man, and in fact, early in chapter 3, there's the following exchange. "Good morning, sir," said my friend. Good morning, sir," said the captain. Late in the song, Pollard also writes, "And even on autosuggestion, his status remains in question." Autosuggestion is a technique used in psychology and self-hypnosis where people try to influence their own physical or mental state with thoughts. As defined by the Cambridge Dictionary, autosuggestion is the power of mind over matter. If you convince yourself that you are cured, you will be. There's also a great Joy Division song called Autosuggestion. In the track, singer Ian Curtis espouses a philosophy towards work and effort that would seem to be in line with Bob's, writing, "Take a chance and step outside, lose some sleep and say you tried." That's very much in line with the Pollard of "See My Field" and "You Must Keep It Coming." And speaking of hypnosis, there's some chilling audio in Grant G's documentary Joy Division of Bernard Sumner talking to a hypnotized Ian Curtis, so check that out if you haven't seen it. Second song is Step of the Wave. Out of the 32 songs on the record, only 10 are 3 minutes or longer, with this track clocking in at 3 minutes exactly, being the first one to appear. And it's a good thing since, for the first minute and 20 seconds, the track sounds a bit tentative, never quite finding a groove. But when Bob starts repeating the song's title and the band kicks in, the song just takes off. It sounds absolutely massive, with Kevin March's cymbal crashes and Doug Gillard shredding all over the place until the song ends in a massive crescendo. Third song on Sign 1 is Carapace.
Turtle shell, hide inside, hide inside, turtle shell.
This is a super fun track with Bob introducing some pretty interesting language by using in a row the words panoply, carapace, and sarcophagus. A panoply is a suit of armor or anything worn that's protective. A carapace is basically a natural panoply, such as a turtle shell, which Pollard mentions in the song, or the shell of a lobster or crab. And finally, a sarcophagus is a stone coffin, a similar but longer-lasting shell. Pollard uses all three of these as metaphors for how we both hide from life and try to shield ourselves from its various attacks, writing, "And you hide a lot, out of sight." He also alludes to these shields perhaps turning into traps we can never get out of. A carapace can turn into a sarcophagus awfully fast if you're not careful. Despite sounding like a depressing song, it's actually a lot of fun with an icy post-punk guitar, a lot of cowbell, and Bob sort of scatting at one point as he riffs on the word sarcophagus. Moving on, it's time to send in the Suicide Squad. Bob turns in a really great vocal performance on this track, almost getting to Cheyenne-level high notes. There's also some nice background vocals, and Doug turns in guitar phrases that sound vaguely Indian or Middle Eastern. As a song title, Bob has said it goes all the way back to that band he had with some high school friends I mentioned before, Dash Rip Rock and the Hairspray Boys. Some of the original lines from that long-lost track were, "Oh, what a lovely day on the Ferris wheel, I found a spider in my soup today." Bob's described the song as being really goofy and kind of doo-wop. The phrase itself, Suicide Squad, could have originated from a couple of sources. The DC Comics Suicide Squad, a team comprised of different supervillains, made its debut in 1959 as part of the series The Brave and Bold. It's made appearances throughout the years, most recently as a lurid 2016 film. Since Pollard's shown himself to be well-versed in comic books, he has numerous references to Superman in his work, and a collective he formed in the mid-70s borrowed from Batman with the name Gotham City Music. I'm sure he's come across this version of the Suicide Squad. But Pollard was also a jock, playing quarterback for his high school football team, so we'd have also known about the sports term Suicide Squad. This refers to a set of players deployed during kickoffs. According to the website sportingcharts.com, the goal of the Suicide Squad is to break up the primary wave of blockers, making it easier for the rest of the team to pursue and tackle the opposing team's kick returner. Wherever the title initially came from, I think what Bob's referencing in the song is the opioid crisis gripping Dayton, not to mention the entire country. As Time magazine declared in the opening to their issue of the Opioid Diaries from February of 2018, the opioid crisis is the worst addiction epidemic in American history. Drug overdoses kill more than 64,000 people a year, and the nation's life expectancy has fallen for 2 years in a row. Pollard's hometown of Dayton has, in fact, been called the overdose capital of America. And even though overdose deaths dropped sharply last year, it's still a huge problem in the community. Bob seems to be writing about this, telling hopeless addicts in a bit of solidarity, "I'm hanging on for you." He then tells them that he's been where they are, writing, "I've known of no tomorrow." And while he's offering hope, he also tells them it won't be easy, advising, "And you should know it's a long way home." But Pollard wants these people to get help, writing to "Send in the Suicide Squad. Their uniforms are blue down on Tranquilizer Avenue." And even though the police can sometimes help, the self-destructive nature of addicts means that cops, or anyone who tries to help, ends up becoming merely a suicide squad. It's a really tender song, and I have to admit that I love when Bob makes a point about politics or society. Surreal lyrics are fun, but Pollard's a deep and bright guy, and he'd be remiss, if not outright blind, to not survey and comment on the crisis happening in his hometown. And of course, this is not the first time he's done this. On the band's very first release, 1986's EP Forever Since Breakfast, Bob chronicled the struggle of those he saw around him, writing, "And it all gets down to the people in our town. They don't want to be found in the other place." They're the places often, as is happening on the streets of Dayton right now, a location you don't come back from. Your hometown can be a hell just as much as it is a heaven, and it's something that Bob addresses on this track. Next up is Blurring the Contacts.
Traffic citations from a speedy trap, and everything you say goes against you.
This song starts with some backwards audio which, before the record even came out, a few eagle-eared listeners on the Facebook GBV group page decoded. Chris Heitoff figured out that the voice is saying, "There's no time in history except 2008 that would be true." And Willie Plashke identified the clip as being from the Dave Ramsey Show. Dave Ramsey is an author and radio personality who offers financial advice. Here's that portion of the song played backwards, meaning we can hear the sample forwards.
There's no time in history except 2008 that would be true.
The rest of the song, though, is not much fun since it's mainly just a slow two-chord riff paired with a really sludgy bass line. It's sort of guided by voices in Jesus Lizard mode. Meanwhile, Bob's chanting surreal lyrics that never quite land. It's not horrible, but coming after a run of really strong songs, this is the first one on the album that I don't like much, but it's under 2 minutes, so it goes by fast. Side 1 starts to wind down with Your Lights Are Out.
Don't know what you want, 'cause I can read your mind. Everything that started above you, hold.
The opening riff to this song, as well as when the drums come in, make it sound a lot like See My Field. However, the song soon takes on a life of its own, and when it does, it's an absolute blast. The band sounds great, with Mark Shue providing some great bottom end against another icy guitar from Gillard. In fact, in the song's last minute, Gillard's guitar provides the counterpoint to Bob's vocals, mimicking an earlier call and response section in the song. It's a great touch, showing just what can happen when the band stretches out a track to the 3-minute range, as they do here. Second to last song on the side is Windshield Wiper Rex.
Mind up the storm and trust it.
This short song, it's just a second under a minute and a half, is pretty perverse, with Bob singing about wet sex and an orgasm theater. Based on those bits, I don't want to think too hard about what Rex's windshield wiper might be a metaphor for. Instead, let's just move on to the last song on side 1, Holy Rhythm. This song is heavy in the same way as the earlier track, blurring the context, although its witty lyrics make it a lot of fun to listen to. For example, Pollard labels drunken ghosts in the dance hall to be boogeymen. That's pretty clever. Bob's said that the track has to do with the spookiness or spiritual ghostliness behind a lot of religious institutions in general, and maybe the morbidity surrounding churches, cemeteries, and funerals. I'll talk in a later song about some of the other religious imagery found on the record. Pollard in this track also uses the metaphor of a holy rhythm to show how a person can get out of step with life, writing, "Broken dreams of broken men got no holy rhythm." Life has a cadence, a flow, and if you're out of step with that, you're out of step with the world. It's why Pink Floyd kicked off Dark Side of the Moon with the sound of a heartbeat. There's a primal pulse or rhythm to life, and if you can't latch onto that, you're in trouble. Side 2 kicks off with Jack Tell.
Jack Tell, clouds part on high. Put them down, justice done. All of you must die.
The song starts as a bare 2-chord track with Pollard singing against just an electric guitar and bass, but then at a minute in, there's a bit of synth and Bob begins to sing softly against just an acoustic guitar. But shortly after this, the whole band comes in, and when they do, the song sounds huge. Kevin March turns in amazing fill after fill, and Doug Gillard turns in some great melodic phrases on the guitar, especially at the very end. It's a really fun song with a lot going on. I don't get an overall point or picture from the mainly impressionistic lyrics, except when Pollard rewrites the old proverb, "Hell hath no fury like a woman scorned," to be, "Jack see what a woman gets you, no hell hath hung her wrath." Another thing to notice that Bob's singing on this song, as it is throughout the album, is a return to his slow drawl country voice of the late 80s, rather than the English accent that was all over his stuff in the 90s. It's interesting to see him, after 30 years, return to the sound of some of the pre-scat LPs. Second song on the second side is Bellicose Starling.
Bellicose starling, annual migration, grading because you're back.
Something else I noticed while listening to this record is just how often GBV songs feature a relentless downstroke on the guitar. Even on tracks that have more of a folk vibe with an acoustic guitar, Pollard still hammers with downstrokes, as opposed to a combination of down and upstrokes. The prototype for this kind of playing goes all the way back to Led Zeppelin's Communication Breakdown, and of course, Johnny Ramone pretty much played that way for the entirety of his band's existence. And I guess that's just the way Pollard plays guitar. You can hear it not only on straight-ahead rock songs, but even on quieter tracks like this one. And I have to admit that, for me, this instills more than a bit of stiffness in the band's playing and sound, and personally, I'd love to see a little more looseness in Pollard's right hand when he strums, especially in slower and softer songs where it's definitely warranted. If you have any doubt that Pollard can swing, just give a listen to his solo track Zoom. It happens all over the world. It's a super fun song and shows just how loose Pollard can be. I wish that vibe showed up more. Anyway, this song seems to be, at least in part, about starlings, mentioning the birds' annual migration. The next track is Wrong Turn On.
For a digital eternity, faces down, enough of us on.
The first line in the song, For a Digital Eternity, is yet another case of Pollard poking fun at modernity. Also, the idea of a wrong turn-on is fun and a pretty classic pun. The music consists of a whole bunch of fast downstrokes on acoustic guitar while Kevin March goes nuts on the drums. It goes by pretty fast. Moving on, meet the Charmless Peters.
I'm tired of watching the child, the insane child.
This song starts with the line, I'm tired of watching the child, the insane child. This child joins others from recent Pollard LPs such as The Hangover Child and The Child Activist. There are a number of references to childhood in the song, including school and being given a bottle, not to mention echoing Beat on the Brat by the Ramones, the kid being throttled. Bob also references the classic Mother Goose rhyme Little Jack Horner when he tells the child in the song to just sit in the corner with Horner. The song's chorus, Smoke Them If You Have Them, has a colorful history. It got its start in World War II, where weary soldiers, when there was a lull on the action and they were given brief breaks, were told, smoke 'em if you got 'em, meaning, if you have any cigarettes left in your daily rations, here's your chance to light up. Of course, the fact that soldiers were actually issued tobacco as part of their day, 4 ounces along with 10 rolling papers, this was actually later replaced with mass-produced cigarettes, was not just by chance or because a majority of soldiers were smokers. Instead, tobacco companies lobbied to have direct access to the soldiers, aided by politicians from states or regions where tobacco was grown. So then, in essence, the military wasn't catering to the needs of smokers, it was instead creating them. This went on for years, the military and big tobacco working hand in hand to give soldiers exposure to cigarettes and to keep them in a steady supply of tobacco products. There's even a book about this, entitled Smoke 'em If You Got 'em, The Rise and Fall of the Military Cigarette Ration. It looks at the cozy, codependent, and ultimately deadly relationship that existed between the American military and the tobacco companies for most of the 20th century. A description of the book from the publisher's website states that this relationship was so rooted that after the 1964 Surgeon General's report warned Americans that cigarettes were hazardous to health, a further 22 years were needed to advance military smoking cessation as official policy, an initial 16 years to sever government subsidies providing soldiers low-cost cigarettes. Even as late as 1990, during the first Gulf War, tobacco conglomerate Philip Morris sent 10,000 packs of Marlboros to an Air Force base in North Carolina, where they were distributed to different branches of service. Of course, the critics of those who wanted to restrict this kind of activity were often called out as disingenuous, with a character from the comic strip Doonesbury lampooning the idea of worrying about servicemen in war dying of cancer since they, quote, might not be around 20 minutes from now. Next up, cheer for the Rally Boys.
Old cold stars in prison bars, learners, burners, daylight returners.
This song, which Pollard's called a fight song and a pep rally for anyone's club or group of people, is an instant classic. It sports a rousing and anthemic chorus that's right up there with, not to mention a bit reminiscent of, Glad Girls. The structure of the song is also really interesting since it basically has 3 opening verses which take up the first 40 seconds of the song, while 4 choruses then comprise the last minute. Maybe it's all of those choruses being in a row, each one slightly changed, that really makes them stick in the head. I should also add that the hey heys snuck into the chorus give it a sort of secret and subversive Monkees vibe. The last line of the song changes the Rally Boys to the Rand McNally Boys. Rand McNally is a company that began way back in 1868 and which became famous in the following century for making maps. It still exists today, publishing atlases and travel books. There are also some great production touches in this track, like strings and synth. It's probably the best example of Mike Edwards' comparison of Pollard to Andrew Wyeth because it's a mature songwriter at the height of his powers. Side 2 starts to wind down with Think, Be a Man.
Be a man, man. You don't need professional counseling.
To my point earlier about all the downstrokes, as you can hear in the opening of this track, when that's all the guitar's doing, setting the beat of the song, that doesn't give Kevin March anywhere to go rhythm-wise. That means that all he's left to do is mimic those downstrokes by pounding on his drums with the same beat. In this track, Pollard seems to be offering some sort of advice on masculinity and maturity, telling men, don't feel so vastly important, and to, well, think. The last line of the song, The Little Girls Do Not Understand, is a refutation of Willie Dixon's classic blues track, Backdoor Man, which goes, I'm a backdoor man, the men don't know, but the little girls understand. The song was covered by The Doors on their 1967 debut, and power pop band The Knack named their 1980 LP, But the Little Girls Understand. Second to last song on side 2 is Jam War Song.
it's bad, fix it. When it's fixed, find a destroyer.
The opening lines of this song are, "When it's bad, fix it. When it's fixed, find a destroyer." Since Pollard's spent a career doing everything he can to deliberately imprint on his songs and albums a sheen of human imperfection, this could be seen to be a comment on the way he makes music. More lines in the track seem to further this idea, Bob writing, jamming it out, making no sense. For a guy who's known for writing thousands of surreal songs, this could also be applied to the way he works. Musically, the song's a lot of fun, with a sort of sea-song beat and some nice double-tracked vocals from Pollard. And while drummer Kevin March is usually asked by Bob to sound crazed like Keith Moon, which he does on a few tracks on this album, the slow pace of this song means March is allowed to breathe a bit more. His slow fills in the toms remind me of Ringo Starr's restrained playing on Abbey Road's classic ballad, Something. Last song on side 2 is You Own the Night.
What's it like being all that?
At 3 minutes and 24 seconds, this is the second longest track on the record. To my ears, it seems sort of an odd choice for a single since it has mostly an acoustic middle section that sort of brings the whole track to a halt. Don't get me wrong, it's a great song, and the multi-part structure is a positive and not a negative in my book, but it doesn't immediately scream single the way other tracks like The Rally Boys or My Future in Barcelona do. After an intro that sounds very much like Space Gun's one-string guitar riff, Bob asks, "What's it like being all that?" He then paints a really nice picture, writing, "Beneath a cloak of trees that run for cover over shadows." Bob's vocal during this section is really great. We're a long way from the neo-basement recordings of the still recent reunion LPs. After the acoustic middle section I mentioned before, the track returns to the full band and it sounds amazing. In fact, the music is led by a really great bass line and is buoyed by strings and Kevin March's relentless cymbal crashes. It's really hard to make out any sort of guitar in the mix, which is something I appreciate since in most GBV songs, the guitar is the lead instrument. This is another sound of how confident the band is in its sound and how Bob is okay if not just plain eager to redefine people's expectations of what GBV is or can be. Okay, so once again, we're at the halfway point of a long double album, so why don't we all take a short break? I don't know about you, but I'm actually a bit tired. It's been a long week and I'm kind of exhausted, so I may just close my eyes for a few minutes. Phew, okay, I'm back. Now, before we dig into side 3, let's look back at the first half of Zeppelin Over China. I have to say, I think it's pretty damn good. The songs are almost uniformly great, the pacing and the arrangement of the songs is almost perfect, and there's no weird lo-fi song snippets to get in the way of a great batch of Pollard tracks. Out of the 16 songs, there's really only 1 or 2 I don't care for. So the same as August by Cake. If this were just a 1-disc LP with sides 1 and 2 making up the latest GBV album, I'd be satisfied. So it's a lot of fun to know we have another 16 songs to go. Let's kick off side 3 by declaring that everything's thrilling.
Break open a heart, not guarantee yours, and the buyers of your expectations.
This is a pretty bare bones song, which finds Bob singing against an electric guitar that's being strummed really fast. It sounds a bit rough all around, so I wouldn't be surprised if this was Bob's original demo, and if it's not, I don't know why some of the other band members didn't flesh this out a bit more. At one point in the track, Pollard writes, "Sin is a powerful ally to everything thrilling." Whereas Blake's famous proverb, "The road of excess leads to the palace of wisdom," shows what can be gained from indulgence, Bob here says that sin, while obviously bad, has an upside. And he's right. You usually don't get a thrill from doing the right thing. Second song on side 3 is Nice About You.
Digging with Daddy, throw me a bone, I'm nice about you.
We're back to the full band on this slower song. In fact, the track sways back and forth from jangly electric guitar to song downstrokes until, a minute and 20 seconds in, the tune gets really poppy with Pollard repeating the word nice as synth strings are also added to the mix. Lyrically, it seems to be an attack on critics or anyone really who tries to judge or even understand Bob. He references the nodding consultants with their piggly earlobes pressed to the wall. Well, they can all rest assured because, as Pollard insists, he's nice. However, when he repeats the word late in the song over and over, you wonder who he's trying to convince, us or himself. Next up, it's Einstein's Angel. This is a pretty much perfect example of how good Bob and the guys sound in this new era of the band and how effortless these amazing tracks just seem to come to Pollard and the guys. It's a slower song, bordering on a ballad, but I love the slower GBB stuff as much as I do the fast stuff, so for me, that's a plus. And even though Bob's vocal feels a little flat throughout, at the end there's some background vocals that really take the track to the next level. It's also at 2 minutes and 37 seconds, a great example of how much music the band can fit into short tracks. Moving on, we have the hearing department. This slow burn of a song is utterly gorgeous. Mark Shue turns in some really slinky and sinewy bass lines, Kevin March's drumming is restrained and perfect for the tune, and Doug Gillard channels his inner Johnny Marr. The whole vibe of the song is just absolutely stunning, and you really could envision this being on side 2 of Strange Ways, Here We Come. While I often praised Tobin Sprout's songs, especially during the run of Reunion records, for having instrumental passages which let the tracks breathe, Bob does the same thing here with a really pretty instrumental break late in the song. And where some GBB ballads, think of Don't Stop Now, explode into catharsis late in the track, this one actually becomes more subdued and it suits the song really well. Lyrically, it's also really potent and powerful, documenting one of the most difficult aspects of a relationship, which is listening. To do this, Bob presents a couple saying he went out, he got lost, while she's not so good and very poor in the hearing department. As Deborah Tannen wrote in her 1990 bestseller, You Just Don't Understand, Women and Men in Conversation, we all want, above all, to be heard. We want to be understood, heard for what we think we are saying, for what we know we meant. Pollard offers his own version of this writing. In the hearing department, no communication, total lack of communication, total children. Tying this lack of communication to acting like children reminds me of Dylan's caustic song Idiot Wind, which ends with Dylan deciding, we're idiots, babe, it's a wonder we can even feed ourselves. Now, get out a number 2 pencil, it's Questions of the Test.
Wake you from a coma, push you out there. Occupy a space that suits you best. Tell you where we want you when you're in there. Answer the questions of the test. Answer the questions of the test.
More than pretty much any song I can think of, besides maybe August by Cake's Substitute 11, this track calls back to Pollard's past life as a teacher. The lyrics, at first glance, are sort of pep talk to a student who's taking a quiz, Pollard telling them to answer the questions of the test. But Bob also offers advice, telling the pupil to make a guess and concentrate, do your best. There's even, at the bottom of the song's lyrics, a space which says, your score, as if this is a test we're actually able or meant to take. However, as usual with Pollard, all is not quite as it seems. The song starts with a student being woken from a coma and then being pushed to wherever the test's being taken. There are then 2 mentions of a robot voice, not to mention a final warning that your life depends on the test's results. Whether all this is merely Pollard's idea of modern education, sleepy kids dragging themselves to school, only to be subjected to standardized tests run by a computer, or if this is some sort of sci-fi fantasy, the same as the track number 2 in the Model Home series off of Vampire and Titus, I'm not sure. The song's also a blast musically since, at 45 seconds in, the track slows down to a bluesy dirge that reminds me of the back half of I Want You by the Beatles. There's also some great backwards guitar, and Pollard's spacey vocals pan back and forth across the stereo spectrum. This lasts for about 45 seconds, and then the song shifts back into rock mode before slowing down and then ramping up again for a final 30 seconds that's just gonzo until it sounds, in its last moment, like a Devo track. It's a pretty awesome musical journey, and it's hard to believe all that happens in just 3 minutes. It's one of the best examples of the musical chops of the band and Travis Harrison's ability as an engineer and producer. It's also another song where Pollard's voice sounds more southern than it has in a while. And finally, I'd just die if they ever played the song live. Side 3 starts to wind down with No Point.
There is no point in fixing it out of your hands. You'll get back in again, I know.
This sparse song is just Pollard singing against a plucked acoustic guitar with an electric guitar strummed underneath. That gives it a sort of Sister I Need Wine vibe. The message of the song at first seems pessimistic, Bob saying, there is no point in fixing it out of your hands. Basically, don't even try to remedy the situation because fate is stacked against you. But in the next line, he's reassuring, promising, you'll get back in again, I know. The song also has some religious imagery and overtones. Pollard's flirted with religious subject matter and questions throughout his career, as recently, and probably most explicitly, on August by Cake's Warm Up to Religion. And yet, however tempted or curious Bob may be, he's too much of a skeptic, not to mention a realist, to buy completely what religion is selling. Late in this song, he writes, "In the chapel, a golden mop." That could be a reference to the gaudy flashiness of the Catholic Church, or it could mean that the golden mop belongs to the believer, reinforcing the fact that religion makes you toil away in this life, all for the very shaky promise of a paradise in the next. The next line is even more interesting, Pollard writing, "I challenge every sinner to know when I will go." Remember that Bob talked about sin in the prior song, Everything's Thrilling, saying that it could be a powerful ally. Here he's turning his focus from the saved to the damned, asking not the church about his death and potential afterlife, but he's instead seeing if the sinners have any idea of when he'll die. Will Bob be struck down for an ill-lived life? Is there any point to it all? All deep questions that get raised by this song. Second to last song on side 3 is Lurk of the Worm.
The proverbial king of kingdom falls. Up to the museum duty calls.
Pollard seems to have a bit of a fascination with worms of all types, since he'd mentioned them in a number of songs, among them Wormhole, Worm with Seven Broken Hearts, Dusty Bushworms, Inchworm Parade, Iron Rose Worm, Males of Wormwood Mars, Ringworm Interiors, and now here with Lurk of the Worm. Musically, the song is firmly rooted in Pollard's love of prog. In fact, you can practically imagine Peter Gabriel with lots of makeup and wearing a big worm costume as he sings this with Genesis at the Roundhouse in 1973. And while I'm not at all a fan of prog, there's some nice things going on musically in the track, and if it tends towards excess, this is Guided by Voices we're talking about. Most of their career has been based on excess of some kind. Too many songs, too many drinks, too many high kicks. But that's kind of why we like them, right? Now, if the whole album were like this, I wouldn't be a fan. But for one track, it's okay for GBV to be more like ELP than REM. The last song on side 3 is Zeppelin over China. At 39 seconds, this is by far the shortest track on the album. It's also the only song snippet on the record, not to mention the only instrumental. In fact, it's just a brief acoustic guitar sketch recorded in the tour van, probably on someone's phone. You can hear keys being jingled in the background right before the van starts up. It's not annoying to listen to, although it's a bit puzzling for this to be the last song on the side, not to mention it sticks out from the rest of the tracks in the album. However, it was said that David Bowie always had one track on a record, usually the last one, that looked forward to the sound of his next LP. For example, The Secret Life of Arabia off of Heroes was a teaser for some of the exotic tracks found on the next album, Lodger, such as African Night Flight and Yassassin. And maybe that's what GBV's doing here, giving listeners a sign of what to expect on the next LP, Warp and Woof, since that album was recorded quickly in hotel rooms and tour vans. Side 4 kicks off with Where Have You Been All My Life? Now, if the band Chicago in the late 80s had a song called Where Have You Been All My Life, you'd be in for a syrupy power ballad. But that's not what Pollard and the guys serve up here. Instead, it's Bob spitting out rapid-fire lyrics over a one-chord guitar riff until 3/4 of the way through, the guitar becomes more start and stop, sort of like Franz Ferdinand's classic Take Me Out, except without the disco feel. Pollard writes in the track, Man behind the curtain is a well-known coward. Maybe you don't know what's right. Bob's referencing the Wizard of Oz's omnipotent but hidden eponymous character, but he's also taking aim, as he did on the Earthquake glue song Main Street Wizards, at people in charge who offer advice but who, in reality, have no idea what's going on. The lyrics also serve up a nice poetic image when Pollard writes of basking on the pavement of a golden street under gray, dishwater skies. This reminds me of Morrissey's description of London's slate-gray Victorian sky from his song Come Back to Camden. Second song on side 4 is Cold, Cold Hands.
With your cold, cold hands, you're gonna sell back your diamonds with your cold, cold hands.
I referenced before the caustic put-down song by Bob Dylan, Idiot Wind. Well, this song is very much in the same vein, since Bob starts with the line, You're going to alienate the flowers with your cold, cold hands. This is a person who's so chilly that even nature turns away from their icy touch. Musically, it's kind of a mid-tempo song with some guitar flourishes that flirt at a solo and yet never quite develop into one. Doug Gillard's an amazing guitarist, and I would have welcomed 20 or 30 seconds of shredding, but instead, since the song's under 2 minutes, that never happens. Third song on side 4 is Transpiring Anathema.
I've got news for you, punk. Let me see peace, humble blood.
This song is pretty funny since it starts with Bob growling, I've got news for you, punk, over a simple guitar line. When the whole band joins in, it sounds just massive, and you can imagine how good this would sound live, with Pollard doing a high kick as the whole band joins in. I mentioned before that Pollard using a bunch of interesting words on this record, anathema being yet another. While the most common usage of the word means someone or something intensely disliked or loathed, or something that is considered completely wrong and offensive, the word also has a religious connotation. It's used in the New Testament to mean essentially God's curse. I don't know which meaning Bob favors, or even if he really means the word literally. It's just kind of a cool word to look at and to say. So he may be using it purely for poetic effect. The rest of the song lyrics don't give me much of a clue. Moving on, it's the self-evident and somewhat meta, we can make music.
All children want to play. The infant eyeball sees into the future.
This is a really nice track that breaks out of the usual hard-rocking template of most GBV songs, not to mention the first 3 songs on this side. Instead, it features acoustic guitars and synth strings. The subject matter fits with Pollard's proggy side, with the lyrics being basically a paean to nature and the interconnectedness of all things. He writes, we can make music with the trees, shake them so they'll sing until they are free. He adds later that it's because of the trees, or rather nature, we create art, saying, we write for them, I really believe. Earth Bob is a nice change of pace from Miller Lite Bob, so I like hearing this kind of sentiment. Plus, since most of Bob's questions around worship have to do with religion, it's nice to hear this more universal, not to mention secular, message. Next up is Cobbler Ditches.
Candy but no one. Quality is nothing. Cobbler ditches your elegant heart.
The complaint that most people make about double albums is that because they contain so many songs, some just end up as filler. And while I indeed think that Zeppelin Over China is a truly kick-ass record, with 32 songs, they can't all be gems. And if you had to point to a track that felt a bit like double album filler, it'd be this one. It's not bad, but it doesn't add much, and if it weren't on the record, I wouldn't miss it. It's based on a single-note downstroked guitar line, the kind that's cropped up a whole lot in Bob's recent work, which appears throughout this album. His vocals are also pretty high in the mix, and there's no real structure to the song. It's just 6 verses with the music starting and stopping, so there's no real tune to latch onto. The lyrics also don't mean much. Here's the opening verse. Candy bar no one, quality is nothing, cobbler ditches your elegant hearts. It feels like Pollard's just stringing together random phrases, and maybe that led to gold previously, but here it just feels like a word salad. However, a fun thing is that a vintage Alien Lanes track gets a mention late in the song, as Bob writes. In casual terms, eating the paper, Candy Bar Mars playing Motor Away. So that's kind of fun. The record starts to wind down with Enough is never at the end.
Enough is never at the end. When the waves are rough, he said.
This short track, with a title that sounds like it could be a James Bond movie, clocks in at just 1 minute and 14 seconds. It's the last of a number of pretty brief tracks. In fact, of the first 6 tracks on side 4, only one, Transpiring Anathema, is over 2 minutes long, and that one, clocking in at 2 minutes and 3 seconds, barely qualifies. This one is kind of interesting with piano, synth strings, and violin. However, Bob sings it in a sort of shouty way, bellowing when the musical backing would seem to call for more of a croon. So instead of being an understated classic like Military School Dance Dismissal, it comes off as not much more than a classier, sad Baby Eyes. However, the ending, which sounds like maybe the original demo, has a wistful and nostalgic quality which blends right into the second-to-last song, My Future in Barcelona.
When you've arrived, there you go. Don't wanna live like a real gone Eskimo, but maybe you do.
At 3 minutes and 49 seconds, this is the longest song out of Zeppelin's 32 tracks. It's also one of the most accomplished. The title's also proven prophetic since later this year, the band will indeed play in Spain as part of the Primavera Festival. While in Europe, they'll also play the UK for the first time in 15 years, in addition to dates in Portugal and the Netherlands. The lyrics even seem to be a sort of tongue-in-cheek nod at the industry and the band's place in it. Pollard writes in the chorus, moving units, testing time, saving nothing, make it rhyme, all in preparation for my future in Barcelona. As a guy who's been in the public eye and the music industry for going on 4 decades, he's indeed moved some units, not to mention he's tested time. And seeing how he's released more than 100 full-length records, not to mention has opened up his archives in the Suitcase series, I don't see Bob as being a guy who's saved much in terms of material. And of course, one sure way to make a song memorable is to make it rhyme, all of which leads to a cushy retirement in a glamorous foreign setting like Barcelona. Musically, the track sounds absolutely fabulous, and Pollard turns in one of the album's best vocal performances. It's an absolute blast and another instant classic, and it's also as good as anything the band delivered in their early 90s heyday. The last song on the record is Vertiginous Raft.
Now is the time for all good men to come to the aid of the party.
The first line of the song, now is the time for all good men to come to the aid of their party, is not a political call to arms, but was instead created by typing teacher Charles E. Weller in the 19th century. It was later changed to, now is the time for all good men to come to aid of their country, because if you substitute country for party and add a period at the end, it's exactly 70 characters long, which is a full line when typed. Pollard riffs on the opening line throughout the track, at one point changing it to, Party now is the time for all good men. Musically, it's a slow song that sounds a lot like Circus Day Holdout from side 4 of August by Cake. While there are some nice touches with synth strings and what sound like bells at the end, since the song's under 2 minutes and doesn't have much of a structure to it, it seems a bit strange to end the record here rather than with something triumphant and fleshed out like the previous track. But I found that this is something that Pollard does often when it comes to sequencing records. He'll start an LP with a short song or one that seems to start right in the middle. This acts to sort of throw off the listener. Think of albums like Universal Truths or Under the Bushes. And he'll often do the same thing with the last songs too, which he does here. It's sort of like how the Beatles, after the emotional and cathartic finale of The End, had Her Majesty be the final song on their final album. By doing this, it leaves the record feeling unresolved, but also like it's still sort of in motion, like there's got to be another track, there has to be more, and yet there's not. It subverts your expectations, and it's a tactic that Pollard often uses to great effect, as he does here, making this actually a good choice for the end of the record. And if the word vertiginous isn't one you use every day, I can tell you that it means causing vertigo, especially by being extremely high. Like if you were, say, in a Zeppelin, perhaps floating slowly over, China? Okay, that's it for the show. Go to everygbvlp.com to listen to all the past episodes of this podcast. Visit rockathonrecords.com to pick up the new album, and visit my website, don'tcallhome.com, to read a few of my novels or download my records. I'll probably be in touch again in just a couple of months when GBV releases their next album, Warp and Woof. It promises to be, a woof. Until then, God bless the Monument Club.
This on the sex list. The new